Afghanistan, a land of mountains that scrape the heavens, deserts that stretch beyond sight, and valleys carved by centuries of conquest. For millennia, armies have come seeking control, glory, and dominion. For millennia, they have left in defeat. From the Persians to the Mongols, the British to the Soviets, and finally the Americans, Afghanistan has swallowed empires whole. Its geography defies conquest. Its people, bound by faith, tribe, and honor, resist subjugation with an unyielding ferocity. And yet, its position at the crossroads of Asia has ensured that it could never escape the ambitions of the outside world. What follows is the story of over 4 decades of relentless war, an unbroken chain of conflict that began in 1978 and continues to reverberate even today. It is a story of revolutions and invasions, of proxy battles and civil wars, of ideology, terror, and unimaginable sacrifice. This is the tale of how Afghanistan became the stage upon which global powers fought, bled, and ultimately failed. In April 1978, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA, seized power in a bloody coup known as the Sour Revolution. Tanks rumbled through the streets of Kabul. Government buildings fell one by one. President Mohammed Daoud Khan and his entire family were executed. The new regime, led by Nur Muhammad Taraki, envisioned a Marxist future for Afghanistan. Sweeping reforms were introduced: land redistribution, compulsory education, the outlawing of traditional bride prices, and restrictions on religious authorities. In a deeply conservative tribal society rooted in centuries-old customs, these changes were incendiary. Rural Afghanistan erupted in rebellion. Tribes that had once feuded with each other found common cause in resisting what they saw as an assault on Islam and tradition. The PDPA, increasingly isolated, turned to its Soviet backers for support. By late 1979, Afghanistan teetered on the edge of collapse. PDPA infighting turned violent. Hafizullah Amin overthrew Taraki and seized power, but Moscow distrusted him, suspecting he might realign with the United States. The Kremlin made its decision. Amin had to die, and Afghanistan had to be brought under control. On December 27, 1979, the Soviets launched Operation Storm 333. Elite KGB and Spetsnaz units stormed the Taj Beg Palace, killing Amin in a ferocious firefight. At the same time, 80,000 Soviet troops poured into Afghanistan, seizing airports, government buildings, and major cities. Moscow installed Babrak Karmal, a loyal communist, as Afghanistan's new leader. The Soviet Union believed the war would be quick. It was anything but. The invasion galvanized Afghan resistance. Across the countryside, fighters took up arms, calling themselves Mujahideen, holy warriors. They were not a unified army, but a patchwork of tribal militias, Islamist factions, and regional warlords. Yet they were united by faith and a burning determination to expel the foreign occupiers. The Soviets responded with overwhelming force. Helicopter gunships rained fire on villages, tanks thundered through mountain passes, and entire regions were bombed into rubble. But Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain neutralized Soviet advantages. In the labyrinthine valleys and high mountains, the Mujahideen ambushed convoys, sabotaged supply lines, and vanished into caves. By 1982, the Soviet military faced a stalemate. Then came an intervention that changed everything: Operation Cyclone. The United States, seeing an opportunity to bleed its Cold War rival, launched one of the largest covert operations in CIA history. Through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, billions of dollars flowed to the Mujahideen. Weapons, training, and supplies poured into Afghan hands. Most transformative of all were the FIM-92 Stinger missiles, portable, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems that allowed Mujahideen fighters to shoot Soviet helicopters from the sky. Once the symbol of Soviet dominance, the fearsome Mi-24 Hind gunships now became flying coffins. As Mujahideen capabilities grew, Soviet casualties mounted. By 1985, over 100,000 Soviet troops were locked in a brutal war of attrition. Afghanistan became Moscow's Vietnam, a bleeding wound draining lives, treasure, and political will. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power in the Soviet Union, determined to reform a stagnating empire. Afghanistan, he concluded, was an open wound that needed to be closed. After nearly a decade of war, with 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead and tens of thousands wounded, the Kremlin agreed to withdraw. On February 15, 1989, the last Soviet troops crossed the Friendship Bridge over the Amu Darya River, ending an occupation that had devastated Afghanistan but failed to bring it under control. The war was over for the Soviets. For Afghanistan, the bloodshed had only just begun. With the Soviets gone, the PDPA government under Mohammad Najibullah clung to power, bolstered by Soviet aid. But once Moscow collapsed in 1991, Najibullah's regime crumbled. Afghanistan descended into chaos as Mujahideen factions turned on each other. Kabul became a battleground, torn apart by artillery fire, rockets, and street fighting. Warlords carved the country into fiefdoms, extorting, looting, and terrorizing civilians. Amid the anarchy, a new force emerged. A puritanical Islamist movement born in the refugee camps of Pakistan. They called themselves the Taliban, students of Islam. Backed by Pakistan's ISI and funded by Saudi Arabia, the Taliban promised to restore order, enforce strict Sharia law, and end the corruption of the warlords. Led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, a one-eyed cleric, the Taliban captured Kandahar in 1994. Within 2 years, they controlled most of southern Afghanistan. By September 1996, they stormed Kabul, executing Najibullah and hanging his mutilated body in public. The Taliban imposed a harsh interpretation of Islamic law. Women were barred from school and work. Public executions became spectacles, and music, television, and secular freedoms were crushed. Meanwhile, Afghanistan became a sanctuary for international jihadists. Among them was a wealthy Saudi exile, Osama bin Laden. From Afghan soil, al-Qaeda plotted the most devastating terrorist attack in modern history. On September 11, 2001, 4 hijacked planes struck the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a Pennsylvania field. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. The United States demanded that the Taliban hand over bin Laden. When they refused, Washington launched Operation Enduring Freedom. On October 7, 2001, U.S. warplanes began bombing Taliban positions. Within weeks, Northern Alliance fighters, backed by U.S. Special Forces and air power, captured Kabul. By December, the Taliban regime collapsed. But America's longest war had only begun. The U.S. and NATO installed a new government under Hamid Karzai and poured billions into rebuilding Afghanistan. Roads, schools, and institutions were rebuilt. But corruption was rampant. Much of the aid vanished into the hands of contractors, warlords, and power brokers. Meanwhile, the Taliban regrouped. Sheltered in Pakistan, they rebuilt their networks, training fighters and launching insurgent attacks. As U.S. forces shifted focus to Iraq in 2003, Afghanistan slid back into violence. Year after year, NATO forces battled an enemy that seemed endless, their numbers replenished by ideology, poverty, and sanctuary across the border. Counterinsurgency campaigns failed to break the Taliban's resolve. By 2010, Afghanistan had become an unwinnable quagmire. In 2014, NATO formally ended combat operations, transitioning to a support role. Afghan security forces took the lead. But morale was low, leadership corrupt, and desertions rampant. In 2020, the United States signed the Doha Agreement with the Taliban, promising a full withdrawal by 2021. As U.S. forces pulled out, the Afghan government collapsed with stunning speed. In August 2021, Taliban fighters swept across the country, capturing city after city almost unopposed. On August 15th, they entered Kabul. 20 years after their ouster, the Taliban were back in power. From the British to the Soviets to the Americans, the story of Afghanistan is the story of miscalculation and hubris. Foreign powers underestimated the strength of tribal loyalties, the power of faith, and the unforgiving geography of the land. Over 4 decades, millions of Afghans were killed, maimed, or displaced. The war reshaped global politics, fueled terrorism, and cost trillions of dollars. And yet the mountains of Afghanistan remain unmoved, its people unbowed, and its destiny unchanged. In the end, Afghanistan has once again lived up to its ancient name, the graveyard of empires.